Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 58 of the Say Again podcast with me, Amrita Tripathi. And I'm joined today by Mr. Samir Patil, who's joining us from New York, but is no stranger to India. And I guess you're just happy to be missing the Indian summer, Samir. Thank you for joining us from
There's
much
like
colder.
2 feet of snow outside.
Yeah. Stay indoors, stay warm and cozy. Thanks for joining us. Samir is the co-founder of Stck, a platform I want to chat more about. We'll be talking about publishing books, value creation in this age of AI, the importance of the human thought leadership experiment minus the cringe. And of course, Samir, we know you as the CEO of the Scroll Media Network. You've worn many hats over the years, and I'm excited to talk to you about how you look at writing across platforms and maybe kicking off with, in this age of sort of doom and gloom, why you're bullish on books and publishing. We talk about AI, we talk about AI slop, and of course, we're able to use some phenomenal AI, Gen AI tools, all of us, especially small businesses. But take us through a little bit about your thinking on and why you think it's not the end of the road.
So I think to contextualize the thing, I would say that I'm not so much just bullish about just books. Books is a form. I'm still bullish that a lot of people read, and a lot of people and more people are able to write. And this connection between reading and writing as our most important form of creativity, more analytical form of creativity. So I'm very bullish that actually once we are past the doom and gloom and the blast radius of this AI, we will figure out ways of continuing that. So the form of the book itself, whether it's digital, is physical, I'm very bullish on those too. But fundamentally, I think people are getting too pessimistic about this. Even if you see the stats, there are all kinds of graphs floating around. One of the bad things of social media, there are all these graphs, but no question of what's the source, where is it coming from, is it your favorite theory masquerading as a graph? So one of the graphs I have seen is, fewer and fewer people are reading books. But that's like saying fewer and fewer people are going from point A to P using buggies or something, right? Because people are reading enormous amounts of things on their mobile phones. They're reading. Even if you look at the sales of books, they have been steady over like plus or minus 1% for last 30, 40 years. So even the most, conservative form of reading is not dead yet. Let's say the news of its death is widely exaggerated. So I don't think that reading and writing per se is going anywhere. I would say that's my fundamental reason to be bullish, that we need this. People recognize it. For all this talk of largely coming from the big tech world of nobody reads, all of that, the fact is they all learned whatever they're doing reading books. So, I mean, there is this fundamental paradox. What people are saying that nobody reads is they are seeming to imply nobody else reads, but we do. So yeah. I'm not going to take the worst case scenario here.
No, I think that's really important context. You're right. We're all reading across screens, across devices. And I was actually just, thinking about how, for example, just this last week, many of us were reading this long essay that Dario, the Anthropic CEO, wrote. So you're seeing the leaders, the movers and shakers of our time also writing, also thinking original thoughts, also trying to share.
Why didn't he make a TikTok video of that?
Yeah, I don't think that the nuance would come across. I think a third of the way through that essay, I have to say. There's still a long way to go. So when you look at... and you've put this in terms also in the past when we've been chatting about value creation and sort of the value add coming from this publishing industry. So in a way, I think that's a really different way of looking at things, because we're so used to thinking about the publishing industry as not having, innovated or changed over centuries. Can you talk us through...
Okay, let me stand on my soapbox for 2 minutes, right? Especially big tech versus, if you look at a 100-year track record of big tech versus, I wouldn't even just then publishing, right? A professionally produced media, cinema, radio, television, books. I would take all of that as produced by a certain industry with a certain structure and a certain set of values. And if you take that and you compare it to what has happened after the tech distribution revolution, I would just call it distribution, right? It is not creating, remixing, whether by random people or AI. It has not yet shown anything that is of sustainable value, right? So if I set against that the entire history of publishing alone, now once we sort of double click just on publishing, the books that have changed the way we think about the world in terms of economics, politics, all have come in the form of books. I don't see anything on the internet even coming close to being seen as that if you take a very long view of history, right? I don't think they're in the same ballpark. I think we have had over the last 30, 40 years when the internet first emerged, when the mobile app happened, then you had the, very low cost broadband distribution. And now we have this AI. All of these are fantastic developments. I don't see them as inherently against the interest of publishing, quality publishing. So let's look at something which is like most certain, news, right? There are far more people reading news today than they did 20 years ago, right? If you take some singular example, but let's take, because the numbers are well known, the New York Times as a print publication had a circulation of a few million. Now 200 million to 300 million people read it. So it's definitely meeting its core objectives. So infinite distribution has been great. I think we should not confuse it with the values of publishing, quality publishing, or what the readers get out of it, right? The internet has done none of that.
So I want to ask you though, because the New York Times is often the example we hear. It is one of the outliers. They cracked that model very early on. And right now we're seeing this sort of trend again of individual journalists, turning creators, having their own Substacks, their own newsletters. Talk us through a bit of the trends you're seeing now and why it's important for us to be paying attention to this. Because I think one of my biggest challenges in life at this point, it feels like the mission where we're hearing constantly that, okay, our attention spans are fragmented. There was a completely made up thing about attention spans and goldfish. There is the fact that everyone feels, of course, that it's harder and harder to focus because we're constantly, immersing ourselves and, deliberately so, right? We're all consciously doing this to ourselves as well. So coming back to this idea of, listen, it might be time to go offline, think original thoughts, don't only follow what the algo dictates. Just take us through why you think it's important, not just the NYT model, but even journalists, individuals, creators, writers.
Yeah, so there are two different questions embedded in that. One is that there is no question there's a crisis in the business model of journalism, especially if you're not a very large publication. Mid-sized publications, individuals can survive. And that's a whole topic of itself. But even there, I would say that in a way, we kind of are at a place where we are back to square one. We are in the 1990s, where everybody had a small distribution. Everybody was happy about it. We chased these hundreds and millions of audiences that is not for most people. So if I take an optimistic view of it, we now have to retrofit the business models to a much smaller audience. It's far smaller than what the internet taught us. And in that, if you look at digital distribution, in the context of that, you can create a subscription model for the whole world without all the paraphernalia of physical distribution. So it's good, but it's a question of expectation setting, right? The internet as we knew it is over. Algorithmic push of news content is dead. In this world, in the past, especially in India, the numbers were 50,000 circulation magazine was a special interest magazine. A million circulation magazine was a mass magazine, right? In English. Even in languages, it was not that big. In a way, we are back to that world, but we haven't yet figured out how to make this happen economics-wise for it. But the optimistic take, I would also say, from the last 10, 15 years is what people value as public interest journalism hasn't changed. People can, when they know when they see it, right? So all the viral thing, all of that, they know. So that's one part of the embedded question. The other is, I think, yes, we will see this as the age of smoking, kind of, when smoking was completely not seen as a health hazard for not just the smoker, but everybody else in the world. I think we are going to see 5-10 years from now that the fact that we let mobile phones be used by children, very young children in schools and all of that, as being completely insane, like smoking on aircraft.
Yeah.
That's so 100% there will be a backlash against it. I think some of it will happen just simply because very young people would not be given access. I mean, every big tech CEO has said this many times. If you ask them how much time they allow their children, it's very small, right? Steve Jobs famously wrote in his biography that he wouldn't give any kid an iPad. So some of that will happen. But I think, the old joke is that we used to think that video games are going to ruin the young generation. And what happened was the internet and WhatsApp ruined the older generation. It's the exact opposite, right? So the real threat is not 20 years and younger, but it's like the 50 plus or whatever, wherever you draw the line. And I don't know how that happens. How do we get a more thoughtful public sphere and not just about news, reading and all of that? From here to out of this whole, hard to see. I mean, I think some of it will come through self-realization, but how much and how that happens, I think, again, we are too close to the brass age. For example, one of the biggest challenges in AI is it kind of gives you the illusion of being able to speak to somebody, right? So if you look at the internet as infinite distribution, you look at social media, people are connected online, but not in the real world. And then you look at AI that makes it even more seductive to be talking to somebody who doesn't have real emotions or doesn't get angry or doesn't piss you off. I don't know. I mean, really, we haven't been able to earlier, like smoking required a ban and smoking was physically harmful to you. I mean,
Yeah.
this might also be, but I think the connections are, harder to make.
Also because it can be so useful, right? I mean, I think the one of the early headlines from last year, right, where it was saying that the links to cognitive decline, because you're actually able to outsource your own decision making to Gen AI and have it handle a lot of your life. And
Yeah.
so you're right. We're too close to the blast radius. I want to ask you, are you normally an optimist? Because you've given a couple of optimistic takes, and I'm not sure if I missed this aspect of your personality.
Yeah,
Are
yeah.
you
I mean,
normally?
you cannot be in publishing unless you're an optimist. No,
This is
the
true.
fundamental model is it's a hits and misses. So many people are doing the same thing that you're doing. Then why would your book
Yeah.
work or your thing somebody would read?
Yeah.
So yeah, no, and I also think that there's in cricket there's a thing fishing outside the off stump. You'll get out. So the thing about being optimistic is that yes, the number of ways in which you can be right is fundamentally smaller than the number of ways in which you can be wrong, right? So going in, it's like being an optimist is like swinging outside the off stump. However, in life, at least in this sort of entrepreneurial world,
Yeah.
I mean, there is no percentage you being a pessimist, right?
Yeah.
There is no real, not even percent. I would say statistically more likely you'll be right if you're always pessimistic, but then nothing good will ever get built either. Let me put it that way.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. So I'm going to come to Stck and Say Again Press, which I'm of course going to chat with you about because it's something we're building and we're using Stck as a platform. But before that, I did warn you that we do talk about the professional and journey and the trajectories as well. So how does it happen that someone who goes from a job in Mckinsey, which carries its own kind of, I think, emotionally charged baggage. You were working, I guess, at Mckinsey with the news industry at that point. How do you chart your trajectory till today, including your interest in the news, including your optimism, including your entrepreneurial gig?
Yeah. With the caveat, there's a lot of post-facto rationalization of random activities. But the McKinsey job was a lot of working with news and other media in New York. I'm back to where I was before. I was always interested in starting something in media. That's how it started. Amar Katha sort of acquired it, went down every rabbit hole of Indian media, produced TV shows, produced films. iPad was new at the time, release everything on iPad, all of that. Then scroll after that, because of the mobile revolution, I was still much more on the publisher side of things in terms of thinking about what will work and so on. And then over time, now I have spent far more years outside of as an entrepreneur in the publishing / media world than anything else I've ever done. So I would say that that's really what I find joy in. And then the second sort of strand of it has been, as you know, I wrote this film, Zagato, which was released a few years back. Then a documentary that has not been released yet, Indira's Emergency. So I've had also a parallel journey in this world, which is very related to publishing. Hence my, sense that I think there is a lot of opportunity, again, especially in India. India is like humongous, right? We haven't yet done anything in our languages of the scale that exists in the book publishing world. We haven't done so much in cinema and radio and other formats, podcasts, that we reach a very, very tiny fraction of the possible audience. So I think it will happen. Like everything else in India, it just takes longer than we think, and longer than especially the lead users like you and me might get onto things very fast. But, as we know, it's a palimpsest with layers and layers of, changes. So it will take time. But so that's at least been my journey, right? So I don't know if you had any other questions.
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of the career trajectory, I do ask leaders a little bit about what has changed for them in terms of, how you look at success or failure today versus maybe 10 years ago. And a semi-related question to your leadership journey is, how do you show up as a leader? Where do you index on empathy? And then I'm going to come back to, talking about what we're working on. But both of these, I think success and failure, especially when you said a lot of this career trajectory makes sense looking back. I think that's such an important thing to share with younger people because there's so much pressure, especially in India, right? Like 1920, you're supposed to know how your whole life will map out. So I think that's an important point for our audiences to also know that actually sometimes you're just going step to step and looking back, it all made sense. But how do you look at success and failure today?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. One, I wouldn't say that at every step I took some massive risk. It was just higher risk than the previous step. Right. So until McKinsey is kind of the standard Indian middle class path of saying, look, I'm going to maximize my professional whatever thing. After that, I would say each has been somewhat of a calibrated risk in an area that I was always passionate about. So whether I had to second guess myself in the long run, like I did not pursue, for example, the biggest e-commerce opportunity trying to sell XYZ, which is what was being done lots 10, 15 years ago. So that my at least professional thing has been to pursue things that are interesting to me inherently, in the sense that even if I failed at it, I would be happy. Right. So that's my sort of goal, that I don't want to do something, you become what you do. So I don't want to pursue something that is hypothetically very big, right? Some MBA kind of analysis tells you this is the greatest, addressable market and all of that. But I think the ingoing success rate, regardless of how big the market is roughly the same. And, most ventures fail. So you're better off doing something that you want to do and you think you will enjoy it, and you learn something on the way.
And in terms of leadership positioning, how do you show up? What
So
kind of leader are
I'm
you?
like in a very unique industry, which is sort of reason my hair has gone prematurely white, which is that has always been, and this is the hardest thing about it. And now maybe you can't say prematurely, maybe it's appropriately white at this age. But, it's an intersection of people, and this is a daily struggle, that there is an intersection of creative people, there's an intersection of business people, there's an intersection of tech, right? And in this Venn diagram, the common point is really difficult to navigate, because everybody has a genuine, passionate reason for them to want to do the things they want to do. And so in this case, leadership comes from actually having very good people who feel like they're going to take the call, right? And then nudging people into only when there's a conflict. I think, especially in media, and this is the hardest thing, this is, very difficult. If you're a publisher and you have an editor, it is the editor who's the boss, really. And it's very difficult to internalize that. And if you want to be editor, then you be editor. You can't be a publisher editor. It's not about some, like natural principle. I'm saying this is a division of roles that creates the best outcome, right? So let's take an example from, publishing. The reason you respect some imprints and not others is they have a consistency of vision that has stood for a very, very long time, right? And maybe the business people running the company who own the publishing and then who own the imprint did not agree with it. But if they had not let the imprint run on its own for many years, it would not work. Instead of micromanaging the imprint, the business has to make sure that they have many imprints. Some of them are more viable than the others, right? So I think while it seems trivial, in media, it has been really difficult. My real life experience, especially in India, is it's really difficult to get this balance going. And so for me, when you say leadership style, it's just really fitting to this thing, right? If I were to run, I don't know, some traditional business, maybe I would have evolved into something different. But in this case, it really is to motivate people to do something that is very risky, which is the first part of it. It is to convince people that tech and design are also a creative thing. If you look, we have been obsessed with design, with everything we have done over the last 15, 20 years. And that is because, we are not driven by only editorial or only business concerns. We were the first to make that infinite scroll happen. This is now seems like a different age, very few advertising slots, all of that. On Stck, we have no advertising, right? Because we are in the post ad generation and so on. So that's sort of, I don't know if it answers your question. For me,
no, it does.
It really is about like being at the back and then sort of pushing people.
I will attest to the pushing people or motivating them, as you put it, to take risks. But I do think you wear it very lightly. And it's a very rare gift and attribute that you have. But coming to, yes, motivating people to take risks. I've been teasing on this podcast that, we're going to be sharing more about Say Again Press, which is coming up this year. And obviously, this is an apt moment to say that Samir Patil, sitting right there in New York, is the person who basically gave me several nudges to do something. And obviously, I am obsessed with books. I have written many books and I am a reader first. So I don't think it was, out of left field or anything. But I don't think without the conversations we've had and without the fact that you said that Stck as a platform has been designed to show that it's not that difficult anymore. You can use the tech, you can use the distribution, and you can reach global audiences when you have them.
Yeah, I think this is soapbox 2 then, from the continuation of it, right? So everybody, I would go back to the original question, like, is this AI a terrible thing for us or a good thing, right? So again, we are very early days. I would say my first assumption is it's a fantastic thing for 2 reasons. One, a positive one, and the other a negative. The positive reason is that it fundamentally increases the productivity of lots of steps that are traditionally a chore in the publishing world, right? I don't think anybody needs to be convinced that proofreading can be automated in multiple languages. So I'm talking of production. I'm not talking creativity. And we'll come back to that if we, if we have time. So I think it's a massive productivity boost for the entire industry. For example, imagine not creative translation, but working translations, right? If we imagine translations for utilitarian content, again, we all jump to the conclusion that, is this going to be able to translate Mahashweta Devi? We don't need that, Arunava is best positioned to do that. But if there is a textbook on electrical engineering and we want it in 8 languages, it can be done and it will be done. Whether we want it in an audiobook format, it will happen, right? So we should be very, very, leading edge in adopting this, because again, in India, like I was saying at the JLF, like we have nothing to lose. We have only upside because we do not have a threatened business model, especially in book publishing. It's small enough that we have every reason to take a risk and try and grow. So that's the positive reason. The negative reason is that I think that the old values of publishing, that somebody selects, somebody spends, somebody's passionate about it, somebody's not looking at some market demand, supply, blah, 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 and doing it in an authentic way will become much more valuable, both the curation, the selection, and the authenticity, because the world is going to be awash in AI slop, right? It already is. So what will happen? Let's think about it, right? When you reduce the cost of production to 0, there's infinite production, and our attention spans are not infinite. The book and the newspaper and the radio and television will already solve this problem. You don't watch everything. There is a filtration. So unlike what most people think, I think we will see a reassertion of, what people sort of dissed as elitism. But it was not that. It was a filtering. So you can have far more selection. You can have all kinds of, and publishing, again, I would bat for publishing. For 100 years, we have had publishing that's literary fiction, pulp fiction, popular. There are all kinds of genres. We don't need to look down on one or the other. At one moment, everybody needs their pulp fiction fix, for example. So I think for these 2 reasons, publishing is one of the areas which AI can amplify, and especially originating out of India, because we have multiple languages, we have a huge internal market, we have a diaspora market, 20 million or so. So that's really the thing. The second thing I would say, of all the industries, I kind of know the publishing one is the most reversed as you can get, even after the internet has emerged. My exhibit number 1 for that is, for the industry, tree books are still a viable entity as opposed to, digital books, because Amazon somehow positioned itself so in such a strong position that whether digital or audiobooks are something that is even less profitable for publishing than tree books, which is a much older format. You would think the negotiations would advance, right? So that's one sort of thing where you see there's a challenge, but it has come through when we didn't have all the knowledge. So yes, acknowledging that we didn't know how the relative power of all the big tech will play out. But what it means today, now that we know and we can learn from the past, I think we can completely reverse the sequence of the publishing industry. We talked about this, which is that today the industry pays the author first, then the author after a few years delivers something, then you pay the printer, then you pay the distributor, then Amazon or some big retailer takes the money and gives you after a long time, and you keep 15%, right? In the end, after all the cuts. And everybody is unhappy. The authors feel they are not being, but the publisher is doing a significant task. If you look at the waterfall of the math, the publisher is giving half the money to the authors. They think they're getting 15%, but that's 15% of the cover price. 30% of the cover price taken by the retailers, discount 20%, printing 20%. The publishers and authors are roughly sharing half what is remaining in hand, right? In most cases. And I think you can continue that, right? But go direct to fans and reverse the flow of money, right? So you should pay the author, and then when the reader buys the book, then the flow of money begins to printers, all of that. I mean, you can do it automatically. That's one. The second is there is a good and easy, non-controversial place to start this with, which is overseas readers. Right now, distribution for the whole world is entirely messed up. Because of tariffs, all kinds of reasons. And this is not just true of India. We have, Turkish publishers, we have like Germany, all of those. Like if you have a large overseas readership and you want to send them a physical book, we have solved that problem, right? It's a solved problem. You know it. You upload the book and it's available in multiple markets, printed near where the fan is, and the fans pay for the mailing, and you divide up however you want between publishers and authors. So that's really the model. I think, again, I go back to the fundamental driver of new kinds of publishing. I think this can be a new age of new imprints, right? The kind you are starting. Because there are so many readers. The biggest category in online reading is romantasy and all of that. but the traditional publishers are not able to handle all the volume of that. So, for example, I think there will be an entirely new generation of those imprints. Same thing with, imprints like yours, where you're doing non-fiction. Indian non-fiction seldom shows up in the rest of the world because publishers here are already under pressure. They don't want to take a risk, even though there are 20 million readers outside. So you can reach those kind of audiences. So I think the entire reversal of flow of the thing can be best seen in a new imprint, right? So Arunava just launched 4 new books yesterday, right? In the past, what would he have done? Like already, like on the first day, he sold 60 of them, right? He would have had to go take a risk on printing at least some amount. Then he would have had to go and convince the shopkeepers. If he was a new imprint, the shopkeepers would say, I will take it on consignment. As you can see, I've spent all my life in the guts of this, right? It makes no sense entirely. All he had to do was spend all his time and money on designing and editing, and now it's up and available for everybody in the world, right? So that's what I want, new imprints. And I think, again, most imprints are a labor of love. It's a question of can you create something sustainable? And I'm not saying they can't be supremely profitable, but not in every category. Literary fiction is tough. So, and on our platform, for example, some of the romantasy writers are making like a few $1,000s a month. That's a very different audience.
Yeah.
So I think that, again, the big picture for a lot of people who may not know that the publishing world is $100 billion industry even today. Around 40 billion or so is trade, and the rest is academic and textbooks and so on. So it's a very large industry. It's not like the podcast or music industry, which is actually tiny relative to what book publishing and all allied is. And if you look at the last 20 big films last year, almost all of them came out of some books.
Yeah, exactly.
So book publishing is ginormous.
Yeah, that's the technical term.
Yes.
Ginormous. No, but I love that you have the stats and that you're backing up why you are betting on this, obviously, because your Stck has been set up to enable this globally. You've talked about different publishers. You've talked about new imprints. Say Again Press is focusing on non-fiction to start with. We are launching later this year. We do want to be multi-platform because I think that we've realized that when we talk to people, somebody might want to listen to this clip. They might want to read what you're saying. They might want to engage with different forms of content. And you've always said that, actually that's, you have to think of your readers and audiences as fans. That's the new, I think, framing and phrasing. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is some hesitation in thinking of the world as fans in the traditional publishing world, but let me make the case for it. The reason to make the case for it is there is a whole world of self-publishing also, right? And the big difference between a bright line between self-publishing and fan commerce, as I would call it, is that there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who have readers of their works who are willing to pay for it, right? They already have it. What we are doing is enabling. If you land on the stack.me webpage, you'll see Stck is for superstars. And we did not say that, lightly or accidentally. It makes sense when you have an audience. It doesn't make sense if you're a first-time author, you don't have any followership. No, right? We want to be very clear. This is about, making it possible for people who have developed through whatever. It could be writers, it could be podcasters, it could be somebody else. We have early adopters. It just so happens because they're my neighbors in New York, 2 of the earliest adopters of this, 2 Broadway writers. One of them have written a book for the first time. He's a writer of Broadway plays and musicals, some very well-known ones. And he managed to do it here. Why would he? He has a followership and fandom. He has got about $20,000 sales in the first 6 months. He would never have got that kind of return by going to a publisher himself. And so that's what he did. And for the publishers themselves, I think the benefits of thinking about the fan world is everything I said is small compared. It's a grape compared to the watermelon that the big publishers are not even tapping, right? What I mean by that is fan commerce is much broader. You have an audience which is so passionate about the characters you created, and you let the Hollywood studios make the biggest chunk of the money. And you compare this to music industry. That music industry had the crisis much before reading, right? In a way, its economics are entirely different. But if you look at how did they change from being able to sell records to still being viable, Spotify doesn't fill the gap. They did much more. Taylor Swift made all her money in live performances. You do merchandise, you do all kinds of things, right? Publishers, when they hear it, the first reaction, but this is not like the kind of serious things we do. Absolutely wrong. I was in Frankfurt for this last book thing. There were 5 big pavilions, as we call them in India. The biggest with almost all the crowd was the romantic thing, right? And they had so many different kinds of things in addition to the books. So we should not think that having the relevant merchandise or relevant, fan commerce things is by itself like doing something that's against the values of the publishing world. That's sort of being sort of really old-fashioned and obscurantist. The same is true of literary fiction. Like, people will pay more for signed copies. You should be selling signed copies directly as the publisher to your fans. It's possible to do. There are, bonus materials you can be launching. A lot of people have done that in the music world. So I think in every category, once you have the direct relationship established with the reader, you have the ability to actually non-cynically offer them things that they might want to pay for, right? Including conversations with the author. When we started with this broad vision saying that we are going to enable. So again, if you land on the Stack.me page, you will see we say that we are trying to enable all kinds of interaction. What has worked, we know already now, 3-4 years in, like 20 million hits a month and 1 million readers come to various authors who have built their sites using Stack. If you look at it, we know that people are able to sell chapters. We would have never thought that. That's the magic of UPI in a way, right? We know that people are able to sell books anywhere in the world. And we know in the same way that there are other items that people would buy, right? So that's the reason I'm using the word fan. I think we should take it very seriously. Fan commerce can multiply your profitability. Same thing, right? If I think about it, a lot of publishing industry saying, will this change the volume of books I sell, right? Fundamentally, right? Let's think the big picture. I think the answer is yes. When new imprints come, that's how it will happen. The growth in industry comes from new ideas, new IP. It doesn't come from selling the mousetrap better. However, in the meantime, instead of having 15% margins on your bestseller, you should have 80%, which is what Stack is saying. Your profitability can improve. The same is true of your fandom. The biggest advantage we have heard from everybody, whether they're selling digital or physical on Stack, is that they have the email of every person who has bought their book. So selling them the second book should be easier. Selling them a signed copy should be easier. Selling them, extra bonus picture book of this book should be easier. Right. So that's why I would say the mindset change from just saying readers and looking down on fans is a terrible one.
I hear you. And I think the surprise and delight, is something that, even in tech, with big tech, you've seen it work when it works for communities, right? And creating that kind of. So you'll be enabling merch also, I know, at some point for us to look forward to. There is a lot of, I think, interest. But I do want to ask you, now obviously I'm invested in this. I want this to work as well. I have skin in the game in terms of our imprint, which is launching soon. Question here that there's very different user/consumer/fan behavior or reader behavior in India versus globally. For example, the traditional thing of like, subscribers. I know Scroll really has worked on the subscription model. Like some of the non-mainstream media have also been successful, as have some of but not as successful as, let's say, when you're talking the New York Times and some of the global. So we know that user behavior in India is a little bit different from other markets. Do you think that this kind of shifting the frame from saying just readers, just subscribers to fans can help move things along?
Yeah, so I think the short answer is yes, but the longer answer is important somewhat, right? So if you look at the world of readership and you divide the world into, non-fiction, public interest journalism is just one part of it, and fiction. I think the big opportunity lies in the news by itself is a very difficult, the rock of Sisyphus. You have to keep pushing it up and all kinds of things happen. But we should not overlearn from it. That's a small part of it. In fiction, I see no propensity to pay that is different. In fact, Indians might be paying even more as the Asians have Chinese and Japanese before for their small mobile novels, microtransactions. Part of it could be infrastructure for payments is much better in India than elsewhere in the world. So on fiction, I don't think there is any difference in terms of how much people are willing to pay. It just so happened that the first attempts in payments were made in the news world, right? But, that's not really the right model for the rest of. Even for non-fiction, the category you are going after, I think the only thing to learn from news is there's a very fragmented audience, right? You might have a buyer, like for example, Arunava's, like I'm just taking a live example. It's somebody in Connecticut has bought it, somebody in maybe Australia, somebody like 5 different continents to get the first translations of, let's say, this Premchand's book. So the thing that we did not do before and we can do now is that for a lot of non-fiction, the distribution could not be done through physical shops, right? What are the odds that the Connecticut person is going to walk into a Barnes and Noble there and going to find the book? That's not going to happen. I think discovery of specialty non-fiction, especially India where the volumes are not very big, is absolutely going to happen online, and people are willing to pay. This is my biggest thing to everybody, that we should be able to make overseas Indian at least as large, if not larger than the Indian market, just because the pricing can be also different.
Yeah. That's true. And, I think when I do love indie bookstores, but whenever you talk to the bookstore owners, you know that this trend is also happening where people are going in to see what the curated titles are and then going online, right, to buy them.
Yeah.
So I think
and also even that we want to prevent, right? So one of the things we want to do is that we don't see ourselves as competing with the indie bookstores. In fact, next step is we are talking to indie bookstores to be able to order from the publisher side directly. Now, this doesn't apply so much in India. There are existing channels to get to the small bookshops. Don't want to disturb that. But outside, there are maybe 100 bookshops globally where they could stock it if they had a way of ordering those books. And if they can order them in quantities of 2 or 3, then it's much easier for them to do it. So I think, again, we don't want to take a narrow view of it. Discovery will happen on social media. It will happen in physical books. It will happen because your friend bought the book. Once discovery has happened, shopping for that book should be super easy. Right?
So,
that's the...
Yeah. So just last couple of questions. I mean, in that scenario where you're saying you also don't want to, you don't want to disrupt where you already have established channels. You are on the side of the sort of indie press, indie publishers, indie bookstores, and independent writers, of course, because even though I think self-publishing has gotten a bad rap in the early days, now you see that there's so many widely successful.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to make that distinction.
Yeah.
Self-publishing is different than indie writers who have readers already, and they're just not able to sell to them because either there's a gatekeeping happening on the publisher side which may not recognize this genre or whatever, or it's just too difficult. Self-publishing used to be where the author pays somebody to try and get this book out. That's a different thing.
Yeah, like a
vanity. And that too has its own value, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's right. So in this scenario, when we're talking about fans, when we're talking about enabling people who already have an audience, you also mentioned, this is interesting, that people are we're going back to that kind of Charles Dickens thing of serializing. People are actually buying chapters. I didn't realize this.
Yeah, they're absolutely buying chapters. That's the biggest seller online everywhere in the world, right? Episodic chapters, part of it addresses the whole question of the ADD, also money outlay, right? So people pay small amounts every week instead of having to pay 250 rupees for the book at one go. It's a pricing model, it's the sachet-sized reading model. So it fully jives. And also you have to remember there's a whole generation which is very used to paying for things, whether it's Venmo and stuff in the US or in India, UPI. I think that's fundamental to our platform. We're creating this connection between the fan and the writer. And episodic content by far is the biggest seller everywhere in the world. It has been in China, in Japan, and now for us in India.
Across genres?
No, it works almost entirely for the romantasy genre.
For romantasy.
Right? So again, these are all easy experiments to do. I think it will also work for certain kinds of academic publishing where you might want to read a chapter or a paper within a bigger book and so on. Pricing should work in the same way, right? At every price point, there is a certain demand. If you go down the price point, more people will try it.
Maybe a last question for the moment before I ask you about gratitude, which we usually wind down with. In terms of framing, so for example, someone like me and the senior editors, we're coming in, we want to try something new. We want to see how we can create the best possible imprint. What are some of your tips? What do you think are hits and misses? What should be avoided? Like a couple of maybe insights or tips would be great.
Yeah, I think I would describe it like old values and new rules, right? The old values still remain, that they have to be what you would have done in a traditional imprint, that you don't go away from the published purpose of that imprint. If that imprint is sort of non-fiction, books produced by experts, let's say that's sort of your thing, then you don't have somebody who's not genuinely an expert just because you wanted to have a bigger catalog, right? Building these catalogs used to be the biggest and most painful thing. Somebody spent their life doing it. Unfortunately, I don't see any shortcut to that. There may be some cost reduction. You can copy edit using Editrix, Meru's thing. You can do all kinds of things. But that fundamentally to me is zero. If the imprint is cynical, then nothing would work, is my sort of thought. Second is, after that, there are lots of interesting things you can do in sampling. So, for example, key learning from the rest of the world is like a free chapter that people can read and leading to the purchase, seems self-evident, but absolutely worth trying and sort of works. Engaging with the audience, right? Not every author is, happy to do it, but many are. And that is what drives sales a lot, right? There's one book, Speaking Tiger, for example, is using Stck, and the author gave a talk in Australia, and since like last 2 days, people have been buying in Australia that book because she gave a talk, right? It seems self-evident, but with Stck, it is possible because the whole industry has lost its entire marketing muscle because entire time is spent trying to figure out whether the printed copies have happened, are they in the bookshops, payments, blah and blah, right? So I would say that for every one of your editors to develop some sense of marketing skills, pushing the authors, something as simple as we did this experiment where for the Valentine's Day month, we posted a social media card and tagged the author saying, look, we are just celebrating this month with this person. She has as many followers and so on. And that sort of went viral for a bunch of people because the readers were celebrating the success of the writers, right? So a lot of the things that the publishing industry used to do long back, in JLF, we were talking about this, like, the best part of the industry was the swagger that we are doing something useful and something people are passionate about. That if we can recreate without breaking the bank, it would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and then the reason to not be cynical is the rest of this conversation, which you have shared with us. So we need to be optimistic.
Yeah, there's no reason to be cynical at all. Like I told you that, again, I can't think about, like, can you think of a country of 1 billion people where book sales are very, very small? You can either believe they will grow or reading will grow, not particularly book sales, and in so many languages. And the cost of distribution is zero.
Yeah.
So and you have a huge diaspora, right?
Yeah.
Just our sheer size makes certain that we can make this happen. And the biggest thing, like when we started Stck, my biggest, what should I call it, learning from the only online space was we don't want to create a situation where your thing is viable, your book or your imprint or all of that at millions of readers, right? That is a road to producing the kind of stuff you see on the internet, right? And that internet is kind of dying anyways.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest things, if you had to go back to old values, is 100 years back, it was possible and feasible for a Tom Paine to just write, that was more than 100 years ago, a pamphlet and make, live on the returns from writing. If we can get to a situation where writers can make a decent living from their writing, that's sort of the building block of the next thing.
Yeah.
And that should not require millions of sales, right? So if you sell 5,000 books for $20, and you keep 80% of that money, that is a decent wage, right? And there are people already on the platform making that much, right? So it is in the US, of course, is easier with the price points, but it is feasible in India as well. So that's sort of the thing to try and crack. So not go for the big numbers, and make sure that you actually have readers willing to pay for what you're doing.
Yes, I love that. Okay, this is a conversation in progress, a work in progress. Just for the moment, as we wind down, though, is there anything you're grateful for that you'd like to share gratitude for? Because we try to wind down usually with that.
Oh, I'm grateful for so many things. So I think the list is long. For now, I would be grateful if the snow melts in next week.
Yeah, okay. And I am very grateful that you took the time out to share this. The 2 soap boxes were much appreciated. Thanks so much for chatting with us.